Here we are for another round of the 70s versus the 90s, and it's an equine therapy session when I put Sidney Lumet's Equus against Robert Redford's The Horse Whisperer. And man, like this one was a rough one to get through. Definitely both of these films are very long in the tooth. So let's just get right down to it. First up, we have Sidney Lumet's Equus, which is based off of a play written by Peter Shaffer, who also writes the screenplay for this. The film centers around Richard Burton, who's a shrink at a sanitarium and stuff, and he's given this patient who's recently been recently been tried for gouging out the eyes of horses with a metal spike, and 6 of them, I believe, was the count. And so they don't really think, they want to like put the kid away, but they don't think he's bad enough to be put away. So they get this woman, puts him in the charge of Richard Burton to figure out, just what the hell is wrong with this kid. And, through a lot of intense, psychoanalytical babble and all this stuff, mental game of cat and mouse, mental masturbation, if you will, and all of this is told by Richard Burton, who's basically kind of giving it his confessional to us and stuff. And Richard Burton, pretty decent actor. He kind of dry, but compelling in a way. Maybe it's the voice, I don't know, but he, the kid himself is very much like, enamored with horses. He wants to basically be a horse, so much so that he wants to, basically consummate with a horse, and all this build up, the movie itself is over 2 hours long, and I feel like you probably could have cut 30 minutes off, and of course, Richard Burton tries to investigate, what are the parents like? Parents are fucked up crazy, and then the guy that owned the horse stable that the kid, gouged the horse's eyes out with, the guys, I should have just killed him then. And then the thing of it is what gets me with Equus is they actually show the shit in the end, because, of course, like, Richard Burton, he's also in like a cold marriage and all this shit. And so like, as he's trying to figure out what the root of all this kid's problems is, the kid kind of throws his own bullshit back into him, and he becomes so consumed with all the horse stuff that he just kind of ends up going crazy himself, but crazy on a different level. Is like, why should I even care, because he ends up tricking the kid and thinking like, because he got the kid's got this notion of, there's truth drugs that the shrinks give patients and stuff. And so he tricks him with a pill. It's like, well, this will make you tell the truth is instant like coffee. And then the kid kind of reveals what happened, leading up to it. And of course, there's always a woman to blame. Jenny Agutter plays the woman that basically sends the kid over the edge, because they both, have a love for horses, and they, ride around in the same stable. And, and she's trying to fuck the kid. She's been, takes him to a porno theater where he runs into his dad. That's awkward as hell. And the dad tries to play it off. It's like, nah, dad, we know you're a perv. It's all good. Or whatever, but that just leads to more, neuroses and stuff. But when they're trying to fuck in the stable, Jenny Agutter and the kid that's all crazy and stuff, he goes like, I didn't want it. I didn't want the flesh. I wanted the hide and all this stuff. And he loses his shit, and then we see him literally gouge the eyes out of the horses. Now, and the thing about the 70s is, this is a film that definitely goes in places, definitely further than Sidney Lumet had went, probably since The Pawnbroker, as far as like fucked up imagery like this. And in my personal opinion, I'm not wanting to shy away from fucked up shit in a movie, but I personally don't think they should have showed it. Honestly, there's a lot of nudity from the kid in the movie. Let's see, what the fuck was his name? Peter Firth, and Alan's name in the film, and it's just there's a lot of nudity from that dude, and of course Jenny Agutter, who never did really shy away from nudity in films, it definitely takes it off of this. But the film itself just kind of falls flat, and it's a devastating picture. Definitely deals with insanity and people not being able to deal with their own bullshit and stuff. And then and the kind of ending, once everything's figured out, the kid admits to it, and Richard Burton's like, what, I can make this dude normal, what's the point? It'd just be another ghost, because in a way he kind of sees himself in the kid. You know, he doesn't want to see another wasted life. You know, a lot of heavy-handed metaphor, a lot of talking. You know, not a whole lot of catharsis. You know, it's just mainly the world is fucked. And you know, by this time in '70s cinema, we already knew that the world was fucked. But you know, speaking of people that can't deal with their own bullshit, we move forward to Robert Redford's The Horse Whisperer, which is based off of a novel. And the film centers around this girl that played by Scarlett Johansson. You know, her and her friend go riding one morning in the snow, and then they have the horses slip up on the ice, and then then the damn truck hits them and shit. So her best friend ends up dying, and her horse Pilgrim ends up, you know, all fucked up to the point where they probably should have put the animal down, but her mother, played by Kristen Scott Thomas, does not want to put the animal down. You know, it's some kind, you know, she's an editor at a magazine, big control freak, you know, and her husband Sam Neill in the film, their marriage is kind of crumbling. You know, it's definitely on the rocks. You can tell these two are not really vibing right now, you know, and especially with a tragedy like that, that shit always tears it apart and shit, you know. And her daughter loses a leg and, you know, may never ride again, and the horse is all fucked up, you know, because they are able to save the animal, but he's psychologically, you know, he's fucked. And so, like, Kristen Scott Thomas, she finds a horse whisperer played by Robert Redford. And the thing about it is, Robert Redford was not one of the best actors, but when he found a part that was kind of tailor-made for him, he could really run with it. And that's one of these parts. So anytime he kind of played the folksy country guy, you know, he really shined in that role, you know, kind of because he had the rugged cowboy look going on and shit, especially at his Silver Fox period at this time. And honestly, one out of all the films that he directed, you know, aside from like Ordinary People, this is one of the better ones. And, you know, of course, when they, you know, then this Kristen Scott Thomas, she drives the horse all the way, you know, puts him in a trailer and drives the horse and her daughter to Montana, because, you know, dude tells her no, he ain't doing it. He's got a ranch in Montana. So she said, fuck, you going from fucking New York to Montana, you know, that's a pretty long ways to go and shit. And they get there, and, you know, he decides to take on the case. He does his thing, but not only does he fix the horse, you know, he like gets the daughter back to, you know, feeling normal after losing her leg, and then a romance ensues between him and Kristen Scott Thomas. And the film has got a really good cast too. You know, Chris Cooper plays his brother in the film, and then Diane Wiest is in it, is the sister-in-law. And you know, it's just the insane. You know, of course, Sam Neill is you know, Sam Neill's one of the great actors, and Kristen Scott Thomas is no slouch too. You know, it's one of those. And the thing about it is, for a movie this tropey, it doesn't deserve to be this good, because you got, you know, the ice bitch from New York City's editor in a magazine, and she comes out to the country and gets thawed out by the rugged cowboy guy. You know, it's like cheesy romance novel written all over it, but it's also a Robert Redford film, so that kind of bullshit is cut out. You know, you get kind of the cheesy, you know, lines. One of the best lines in the movie is, you know, she has, you help people with horse problems. Like, no, I help horses with people problems, you know. And, you know, it's very quippy, you know, because you got the whole that culture clash of the urban and rural type shit and stuff. But beautiful cinematography by the great Robert Richardson in the film. Definitely captures that big open country of Montana and stuff. And, you know, and in the end, you know, of course, spoilers, all this shit. If you don't watch the movies before you watch these videos, or if you don't give a fuck, then who cares about it? But, you know, of course, there's all kinds of shit, you know, that very mature adults, because you see the character growth of Kristen Scott Thomas. And, you know, even though, like, she wants to have you know, she wants this romance to really blossom, and, you know, Redford's character does too. It just that they decide to just break away. You know, they're gonna go for one last ride, but she says fuck it and she drives away. You know, it's a really moving scene. You know, and the fact that they don't end up together, they don't even attempt to try it, because they're, you know, they, just as much as the audience knows that shit ain't gonna fucking work out. But, you know, it's a nice fantasy, but it gets, you know, in a way, it helps everybody figure out what's most important. You know, doing shit you don't want to do. It, you know, fucked up situations usually land you where you need to be. So this round clearly has to go to The Horse Whisperer. So the 90s get this round. They ain't got a round in a while, but For anybody keeping score, that's 39 to 32. 70s are only up by 7 now. 90s could be on a comeback. It's something like Equus. Just it's it's kind of overt for the sake of being overt. It's almost flirting with the kind of fucking flagrant exploitative tactics that Barbra Streisand used in The Prince of Tides. And especially for a director of Sidney Lumet's caliber, I expect better shit from it. And while it's not a bad movie, the performances are good. It just doesn't really, for me, it doesn't fully understand what it is. Whereas like The Horse Whisperer, Robert Redford fully understands the material and really good at directing people, even himself. This is probably the best performance that he did directing himself. And he didn't really direct himself very often because even Redford knew that he was a shitty actor. But like I said, in a part like this, he really shines, because all he really has to do, flash that signature Redford smile, and bitches will just do anything for him, So if I've said anything wrong, anything you disagree with, feel free to eviscerate me in the comments. Like I said, this is a doctoral thesis that turned into a fucking scientific obsession. 70s are only up by 7, but it looks like the 90s could be coming back. They got around after a while and stuff. And it's the thing too. Even though what could have been a cheesy, and honestly, dude, both movies could have been a lot shorter because The Horse Whisperer is nearly 3 hours long. And we could have shaved some fucking time off of that shit. But that's just how fucking abhorrent Equus was. That the horse, this long-winded fucking back to good romance movie. It's a real beautiful film though. I'm talking shit just because I had to sit through both of these movies. But anywho, it's spooky season 2. We'll see a lot of bonus rounds for that. Definitely, this shit's heating up. I'm having fun with this, or maybe I'm not. I don't know. All I know is it's a journey, and I'm on it.